So thank you so much for inviting me to provide this overview of our new research toolkit focused on antiretrovirals in pregnancy and breastfeeding. I was supposed to be presenting with my colleague, Dr. Shaheen Lockman, but she unfortunately couldn't be here because she's fighting many battles. She's from Harvard, so there's been news the last couple of days, and she's also struggling with the studies that she works on in Botswana. So difficult times. So my name's Claire Townsend. I'm an epidemiologist based at WHO in the HIV, hepatitis and STIs department. And I've been working supporting the HIV, hepatitis and STIs pregnancy and breastfeeding therapeutic working group, which was set up a few years ago, and I'll give you a little bit more background about that in a minute. So I'm sure I don't need to remind any of you that antiretroviral treatment in pregnancy is incredibly important and prevents vertical transmission as well as improving maternal health. But as you also, I'm sure, know, can be associated with adverse pregnancy outcomes. Most pregnancy research, HIV pregnancy research to date has really been focused on pregnancy and breast milk PK, pharmacokinetics, vertical transmission and congenital anomalies, but actually the effects of antiretrovirals in pregnancy on other important outcomes has been maybe a bit less visible, but can have a greater impact actually on the health of mothers and children. We know that healthier mothers have healthier babies, and so there's no, and that vertical transmission, prevention of vertical transmission is critical. So there's no question really that ART is recommended in pregnancy for the health of both the mother and the fetus, but it's important to know whether some regimens are safer than others, and we don't know this unless we do the research. This slide is from one of my colleague Shaheen Lockman's studies, the VESTED study, and shows you data from this trial that highlights the importance of looking at pregnancy and infant outcomes with recent or contemporary ART regimens. And so the slide shows you pregnancy outcomes in this randomized control trial that evaluated the safety and efficacy of 3 different regimens started in pregnancy. And different outcomes you'll see are shown along the y-axis. And so in this study, they found that dolutegravir-based regimens had significantly lower rate of any adverse pregnancy outcome compared with either of the other regimens. And this was driven mainly by lower preterm delivery rates, but also small for gestational age. And there was also a significantly higher infant mortality rate by 50 weeks in babies born to mothers on efavirenz-based regimens during pregnancy compared with dolutegravir. And so now we have a good body of evidence showing that certain antiretrovirals are associated with specific pregnancy outcomes. But this really highlights the importance of conducting research in pregnancy. In general, we have a fairly poor track record for studying drugs in pregnancy. Over 90% of FDA-approved drugs have no pregnancy data at all. And for some antiretrovirals, we do have some pregnancy and breastfeeding PK data, but typically there's been a long delay between licensing of a drug and initial PK data in pregnancy, and often sort of insufficient and high quality pregnancy data to inform patient care. And so the focus is often on the potential harm to the fetus of medications taken in pregnancy, but actually not taking the treatment in pregnancy because of lack of data can also harm the mother and fetus. And this can be due to avoidance or cessation of treatment, underdosing of a drug during pregnancy, or use of an inferior treatment when a superior one is actually available. So pregnant women have typically been excluded from research, but But actually, what is often not appreciated is that exclusion doesn't remove the risk. It just shifts the risk from a setting where we have informed consent and intensive monitoring to routine clinical settings when women taking antiretroviral regimens become pregnant on those regimens. And on top of this, from a WHO perspective, excluding pregnant women from from pre or post registration clinical trials can actually delay the introduction of safer antiretrovirals for the mother and the baby, and even for the wider population. And so over the last 7 years or so, a number of key stakeholders have really articulated some major conceptual shifts to support the inclusion of pregnant women in research, with a move from protecting from research to protecting through research. And in order to address the delays and data gaps that we've seen, WHO and the Impact Network convened a series of workshops and meetings from in 2020 to 2022 that included a really broad array of collaborators. And output from this work was disseminated through a call to action and also a number of different articles in a JIAS supplement. So in this call to action and the work around this, a new framework for accelerating and studying new antiretrovirals in pregnancy was introduced, and the key principles of the framework were adopted and disseminated. And subsequently to this, WHO convened a new working group on pregnancy and breastfeeding, which I support. And the aim of this group was really to continue this dialogue and promote inclusion of pregnant women in research and to move from theory to action. And so this slide shows you the sort of key points that the working group was set up to address. And you'll see with the red arrow, one of these points was to develop resources to optimize clinical research in pregnancy through a toolkit. And this is really how the toolkit came about. So the toolkit is called Antiretrovirals in Pregnancy Research Toolkit. We needed a kind of shorter name. It actually covers breastfeeding. It covers also treatments for STIs and hepatitis. And we're in the process, in addition to this, of working with a parallel group at WHO who are now aiming to mirror what we've done for HIV, hepatitis and STIs for a more generic toolkit, which would apply to different disease areas. But so the pregnancy toolkit was designed with the goal of supporting and accelerating the generation of pregnancy and lactation data on medicines for HIV, hepatitis and STIs by encouraging better inclusion of pregnant and breastfeeding women in clinical trials and other studies as well. And so the toolkit is an open access resource. Hopefully some of you have maybe had a chance to have a look at it already, but if not, I would invite you to do so after the talk. And it serves as a living repository of practical materials from some of the key studies that have successfully included pregnant and breastfeeding women. And the materials in question are protocols, informed consent forms, case report forms, and also a range of more specialized materials, such as training materials for clinical staff or statistical analysis plans. And we also, in this toolkit, wanted to address the call for more harmonized data collection on pregnancy, maternal and birth outcomes to enable data sharing and comparison across studies involving pregnant and breastfeeding women, because often when we are looking at rare outcomes, one study won't have sufficient numbers to be able to come to a conclusion, and so it's important to be able to compare across studies as well. We also so in this toolkit we have materials from over 20 studies of that have involved pregnant and lactating women. And we provide links also to videos, community engagement work. I'll give you some more detail about all of the different sections. And really, it was very much a collaborative piece of work. My colleagues, Shaheen Lockman and Sinead Delaney were key in taking this work forward, but we had contributions from more than 30 members of our working group. So who is the toolkit aimed at? Well, really, anyone who's engaged in evaluating new or existing drugs at any stage of drug development, from all the way through from preclinical studies to registration and post-marketing surveillance. It's aimed at colleagues who are seeking to understand why it's important to include pregnant and breastfeeding women who are maybe kind of early on in the thought process, but also ones who are really looking for practical help and seeking to understand how to go about including these populations in their research. And it's also aimed at researchers who are perhaps conducting studies in adults who are with these conceptual shifts going on, who will have to be more aware of how to monitor and follow up women who become pregnant in a trial that is generally in non-pregnant people. And our aim is really to help researchers and stakeholders across different studies and organisations to be prepared for this shift and for better inclusion of pregnant and breastfeeding populations, and to be able to support women to make informed choices about staying in a trial and continuing on a study drug. So I'm now going to show you what the toolkit looks like. I'm not expecting you to read anything on the slides. It's I'm showing you some screenshots, but you'll see on the left-hand side, these are the different sections that we have in the toolkit. So it kind of mirrors what you'll see when you go in. You can click on the buttons on the left-hand side to access the different sections. For each of the sections, basically, we provide a summary of the main concepts for that topic, with links to some of the key reports and publications on that topic. And we also provide, within most of the sections, we then provide materials that are some of the best examples we have from studies that have been inclusive of pregnant or breastfeeding women. And I want to point out as well that many of these materials were not previously publicly available, and they were generously shared with us by numerous study teams. So we're really grateful for all the great input we've had for developing this toolkit. So the ethical considerations section provides a really nice overview of the role of ethics in advancing research in pregnant women, and also of the ethical frameworks that underpin and support fair inclusion of pregnant and breastfeeding populations in clinical research. And so really the shift that has happened is from viewing pregnant and breastfeeding women as a vulnerable population to viewing them as a complex population. And as I said before, rather than protecting them from research, protecting them through research. And so what we really want to start from is a starting point of presumptive a fair inclusion now, rather than presumptive exclusion. So previously, pregnant women were automatically excluded from clinical trials, and now we want them to be included in a fair and considered way. And so this ethics section includes a rich repository of different reports and guidance documents and other articles from numerous countries and also from different subject areas, not just HIV. And we think this will be particularly useful for researchers who may be developing funding applications and need to understand what the ethical underpinning is for this change in rationale, really. So moving on to the section on community engagement. So really, this section highlights the importance of good communication and engagement with the community of women living with HIV across the life cycle of clinical trials, from trial design all the way through to dissemination of findings. And we actually have a really nice example of this and recent example of this in the Purpose 1 trial of lenacapavir. And so this section provides access to tools and approaches that can be used to enhance communication and engagement with community members and community groups. We have a couple of videos included. We're actually adding a number of materials from AVAC at the moment. That should be live in a couple of weeks. And we're also in the process of developing a lay summary of the main content of the toolkit, which is aimed at community members and research participants and their families after some input. We had suggesting that pregnant or breastfeeding or women enrolling in clinical trials may like to access this as an external source to provide information on the importance of enrolling in a trial. So I'll next just touch on the section on pregnancy and lactation PK. This section summarizes basic principles of pregnancy and lactation PK studies and provides links to regulatory agency guidance on the topic and groups involved in this work. So ideally, pregnancy and lactation PK safety data from even a small number of women should be generated for any new drug. This should be done before or shortly after it's licensed. And this is a critical piece of information in order for recommendations to be made about the use of a drug in pregnancy. And one way to achieve this is to gather pregnancy and lactation PK data in consenting women who become pregnant while participating in trials. And this is what is recommended as long as the non-clinical data didn't raise any concerns and as long as dosing in non-pregnant people has been established. And through these sorts of nested PK studies, many researchers and participants who are not otherwise focused on pregnancy research can actually help to generate vital and timely pregnancy and lactation PK data. And so in the toolkit, we currently provide access to study protocols, manuals of procedures and forms and the like from 2 prospective impact PK studies of HIV drugs used in pregnancy and lactation. And we also provide links to other studies and networks that are involved in pregnancy and lactation PK work. So I'll next describe the section on clinical trials and observational studies. The section first summarizes key considerations in assessing pregnancy, assessing drug safety in pregnancy. And then this section is really where you'll find the most comprehensive list of study materials from clinical trials and also observational studies that enroll pregnant women. And in addition to a number of implementation studies of HIV, antiretrovirals used for PrEP. I think so far we have materials from 14 clinical studies. 12 of them are evaluating agents for prevention or treatment of HIV, 1 for hepatitis C and 1 for Mpox, although the Mpox one has just closed, unfortunately, for lack of efficacy. And we expect, we expect this section really to be useful to people who are adding pregnancy or lactation safety evaluation components to their work, which might otherwise not be focused on pregnancy. And indeed, the toolkit provides examples of such studies. So we often rely on active surveillance or pharmacovigilance studies to evaluate possible effects of a drug used in pregnancy that can't be measured in a clinical trial, for example, for rare outcomes for which you need larger numbers of pregnancies, or for outcomes that are longer term. And historically, pregnancy pharmacovigilance often lacked standardization or lacked non-exposed comparator groups and reliable denominators. And all of this really resulted in inadequate data. And so the toolkit provides some guidance for surveillance of key maternal, birth and infant outcomes, focusing on standardization, data quality and harmonization of outcomes, and aiming, therefore, to facilitate linkage between surveillance networks to allow rapid evaluation of a possible safety signal if one is identified, as I mentioned previously. In the toolkit at the moment, we have materials from 7 different pregnancy surveillance studies or registries. 6 of them are on HIV, 1 focused on hepatitis C. And some of these studies use large prospective birth outcome surveillance at sentinel sites to collect pregnancy exposures and outcomes in a standardized way, and others use electronic medical record linkage to obtain pregnancy and infant safety data, or traditional prospective registries. And again, as in the other sections, the materials include protocols, case report form, training materials, and so on. So the last few slides concentrate on a section of the toolkit that's focused on pregnancy study endpoints or outcomes. So one of the overarching points that we like to make regarding pregnancy research is how important it is that we collect a common set of endpoints, also using standardized endpoint definitions and measuring the endpoints as accurately as possible. And this just facilitates good data quality and cross-study comparisons, and then also reduces the work of just repeatedly having to develop these materials. So the toolkit includes a suggested list of key pregnancy, infant and birth outcomes that are grouped by tiers. So we've outlined 3 tiers: core, expanded and comprehensive. And the tier assignment was really guided by 2 main factors: the relative clinical or public health importance of the endpoints, and also the feasibility and resource intensity of collecting data of a reasonable quality on that endpoint. And you can see in the top table the suggested core, birth, maternal and infant endpoints that are recommended for collection, and where possible and relevant, depending on the study, drug and design, additional endpoint may be useful, and these are shown in the expanded and comprehensive endpoints, and it really depends on what the study design is and what the resources available are. We also included in the toolkit a list of standardized definitions for these core outcomes. And these definitions are harmonized with the WHO definitions of core pregnancy indicators, and are generally consistent with commonly used definitions. I've just showed you one example here, but you can access the full list in the toolkit. And we also wanted to address the fact that rates of adverse pregnancy outcomes can vary substantially between populations, and by maternal age, location, time, etc., even when they're ascertained in a similar way. And women with HIV often have higher rates of adverse pregnancy outcomes than women without HIV. And so it's really critical that we consider any pregnancy study results in the context of locally relevant outcome statistics. And ideally, when conducting a study, we should collect endpoint data in pregnant women who are and are not exposed to the drug of interest, in order to have data on the 2 groups from the same site. But with this in mind, we wanted to provide some ranges of prevalences for the key pregnancy study endpoints to assist with study design. So we collected these estimates mainly from low middle income countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, and from studies conducted since 2010 to provide sort of somewhat recent and relevant comparative estimates. However, we do want to stress that they're not sort of definitive estimates. It wasn't a systematic review that we conducted. It was really just to provide a sort of broad range for researchers who are maybe not familiar with conducting pregnancy studies to have a basic idea of what the prevalence would be for each of these outcomes. So we've provided a table for women living with HIV and also comparative prevalence ranges for the general population as well. So finally, we also include some examples of power and sample size estimates for pregnancy studies using a range of individual endpoints of interest, as well as between group endpoint ratios of interest. And these endpoints are provided, again, as examples. Investigators will always want to conduct their own power calculations when designing their study, but it provides some sort of reference that could be useful, particularly in the early stages of thinking through a study design. So that's basically a whistle-stop tour of the toolkit. We are still, this is a work in progress, and I forgot to say the toolkit was launched at the AIDS conference in Munich last summer. So we're still in the process of developing the toolkit. We're trying to keep an eye on new relevant materials that are published, or that new studies that are getting underway. So we're always very happy for people to get in touch with us if they have materials that may be of interest. We're very keen to disseminate the tool. The purpose of it was really, it was such a collaborative effort, and really such an amazing endeavour involving such good data sharing from many different groups, just with the aim of helping researchers to be more inclusive of pregnant and breastfeeding women, and also to conduct their research in a way that will provide the best quality data. So please feel free to come to us with questions or comments. Please disseminate and share the toolkit with anyone who might be interested. And we're also keen to add resources from the STI and hepatitis fields as well. We did have quite a lot of contact with people in the field to try and expand on these topic areas, but it sort of highlights that HIV is really has driven a lot of work on this front to be more inclusive of pregnant and breastfeeding women. So our email address is there, the website is there, and I'm very happy for people to contact me if they have any questions. And I'll just finish by acknowledging the many people who worked really hard to create this toolkit, including Dr. Lockman and Dr. Delaney Moretry, Elaine Abrams, who was really critical in spearheading all of this work, really, and Impact's involvement, and the many individuals from the working group who contributed to the individual toolkit sections, who I have acknowledged at the bottom of the slides throughout the presentation. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Well, want to see, does anyone have any questions at all?
Yes, I have a few questions and comments. One comment is toolkit. I think this may be an inappropriate term because this is an entire tool shed. I think every tool possible is created and included in this incredible resource. I'm really blown away by how comprehensive this resource is. So just congratulations. I mean, standing ovation. It's really impressive what you've put together. So yeah, really congratulations to everyone involved.
Thank you so much for your comments. It's always nice to have positive feedback and to know that people will find it useful. Thank you.
Yeah. And maybe that leads into a question. What's left, what may be not included in the toolkit or what still needs further development? I can't think of a single thing. It seems like you thought about everything, but you're the experts. What do you think is left to do?
So in the discussions we've been having with WHO colleagues about creating, who are thinking of creating a generic non-disease specific toolkit, the only additional areas that they highlighted were a section on regulatory aspects, but we have included this within the ethics section, I think. So that might just be something to tease out. I think we'll look at that going forward. We're also in the process of adding some case studies, just kind of outlining, I think this was on PK aspects, and lessons learned as well, just to kind of highlight that not everything goes smoothly. These are some of the things that might go wrong. Yeah, those are the main things.
Well, thank you. I see Brianna has a question.
I do, thank you. What an excellent presentation, and I agree with Brian 100%. This is a tool shed. So I really enjoyed this because everything you need to know, here's a one-stop guide. Have you guys, when you are disseminating this information, how are you presenting it? Is it in this deck? Do you have like a little, like a flip book that can be handed out at clinics? What's the best way for both healthcare providers and possible participants to have access to this?
That's a really great question. To date, we have our dissemination efforts have mainly involved mainly gone through the working group members. We have about 60 or 70 working group members, and so we're sort of hoping they have been sharing it as widely as possible. We have been invited to give a number of talks on this, which has been really great, knowing that people are interested. We have not got any handouts or anything of that sort so far. We were planning a newsletter, which hopefully we'll manage to put together for later in the spring. Things have been a bit delayed on that front. And actually, the other point is, it was only when we launched the toolkit at the AIDS conference that a community member got up and asked us about access to the toolkit, if there was anything that was aimed at study participants and women. And really, we had, until that point, had really viewed it mainly as a tool for researchers, obviously with all the other stakeholders potentially interested, but we were really focusing on researchers, and it made us kind of think a little bit more that we might need to adapt it slightly. We hadn't thought about handouts or anything like that, but it's an idea. I'm not sure how we would get them sort of distributed. But yeah, welcome to any other ideas if you
just quickly, like mini, like kind of pocket flip books at like antenatal clinics and places where they would do research in this targeted population. I think that'd be amazing. Just something for people to kind of think about. But I mean, however you get it out is wonderful. And this is the fact that it even exists is wonderful. So well done, you all. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I think it will be, I think possibly through research networks as well, that study investigators can maybe have, if we make a printout available that investigators could print and provide to women along with the study materials and consent forms and so on. That might be one approach.
I'm going to pop one over to Murph real quick because I think she's going to say something about the newsletter and production things, since that is when her hand went up really fast. And then we'll go to Allegra.
Yeah, I was just going to say I run the social media and work on the newsletter here at Hank. And with your permission, I would love to uplift this on our social media and maybe do a little feature in our newsletter to get the word out.
Sure, that sounds great. Yep, yep. Please get in touch if you want to discuss how best to do that. But yeah, that would be great.
Yeah,
I'll connect you
yeah, I
guys
can
via
put my
email.
email in the chat too.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Allegra. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm in the ACTG, and we have a very large community women's working group. I think they would be fascinated and excited to hear this presentation. So if that's possible, could I get in touch with you and see if that's
Definitely. Yep.
arranged? Great,
That's
thank you.
I'll include in the recap email when I have this video clip for folks who aren't here, I'll include Dr. Townsend's email for folks to get access via that. So keep your eyes out right when this call is done and my computer decides it's okay to download this video. It's not suspicious that it's coming from Teams, then I will include all of that.
Sounds good.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
So I saw the names, I saw Sharon's name in there, Sharon Nachman, and Sinead in there. So, obviously these are two PIs of two of our research networks.
Yeah.
Rosie.
Say again?
And Rosie.
And Rosie, okay, yep, from ACT. Yeah, I was looking for names of our network representatives to make sure that this is being distributed across the networks. Are you aware that this is being fully and comprehensively utilized throughout the 4 DATES-funded networks?
I think so, yeah. I think that Shaheen gave a talk possibly to ACTG or to a group within ACTG. Impact, definitely. I'm not sure if we've spoken at the others, but yeah, we definitely been in touch during the process. We actually sent out our early version of the toolkit for piloting with many collaborators in the different networks as well.
That's great. Yeah, we did an analysis in 2021. So right around the time this was being created, we looked at inclusion of pregnancy considerations across all actively enrolling studies in the networks. At that time, there were 47 studies that were actively enrolling. MTN was still one of the 5 networks at that time as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled up what we found. We found that 2/3 of studies prohibited the inclusion of pregnant participants,
Mm-hmm.
and about half required participants with pregnancy potential to use contraception to avoid becoming pregnant during the study. And then we looked at, what was written in the protocol about why that exclusion criterion was written into the protocol. And most of them, I think, it looks like 20 out of the 27 exclusionary studies didn't cite a specific policy or scientific justification for the exclusion. They just wrote a general lack of certainty about the safety profile of the study product.
Yeah.
So it would be really interesting to see. I think what we would love to do on our end is kind of a post analysis to see since that time how the networks are doing in terms of inclusion of pregnant participants.
Yeah, and hopefully this is happening less frequently.
Yeah.
Well, certainly the Purpose 1 trial of lenacapavir was a great leap forward on that front, and set a really excellent example for how things should be done.
Absolutely. My last question for you is, you had a slide early in your presentation about FDA approval, how 90% of approved drugs don't have adequate pregnancy data, but it said up until 2010. I'm just curious about the date of that.
I think that was just date that was based on a review that was done up to 2010, so somewhat out of date. I think I just didn't have anything more recent than that.
Sure, yeah, that would be another piece of the puzzle, maybe to look at the last 15 years and see how things have evolved.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for amazing presentation. Really appreciate your time and all of the work that you put into this resource.
Well, thank you for your comments.
I wanted also just to comment, I'm really grateful that you put in the general population statistics and kind of toggle to let us see them back to back, because especially in the context of the US right now, I think people really forget how common just spontaneous miscarriage and stillbirth just is. in pregnancy, and it's not necessarily because of, well, it might be because of something, but it's not necessarily like a shocking thing that the pregnant person did wrong and caused things. And so that's another thing, just seeing those numbers right next to each other to say, like, yeah, this is something that will happen no matter if you're giving this person a clinical trial drug or not. So I think that's also really important to kind of nail into, even sometimes working in like a research field. Sometimes I feel like some people just don't quite get that, which I'm sure you're very intimately familiar with.
Yeah. Well, and particularly the data on miscarriage is really, really difficult because generally you don't have the data. The women don't present it. Well, they present to different places with miscarriages, and so studies that may want to measure that outcome have to be very carefully designed. Yeah.
Well, I think that covers all of my questions and thoughts. And does anyone have anything left before we set Dr. Townsend here free?
Just to say thanks. Wonderful work.
Thank you
Thank
so
you all
much.
for listening.
Okay, I'm going to stop.
Great. So yeah, please get in touch if you have any question or anything.